Chapter 11. Battle Royale. Gaia World. 4 days after the shattering, after a few minutes of jogging, zigzagging between trees that cast ever more elongated and deeper shadows, with every passing minute Powell ran into a clay tadpole that was completely fixated on a pine tree, chattering its teeth and dancing around it. He stopped to assess the situation and catch his breath from the run. Attentively scanning through the branches of the sprawling pine, he searched for whatever might have climbed there, but at first, he couldn't see anything in the gathering dusk. Finally, the small, cat-sized animal hissed angrily, drawing his attention to the right spot. From a distance, it looked exactly like a house cat. He couldn't make out the colors in the low light, but there were glimpses of red fur. Satisfied that it wasn't anything he needed to worry about, Powell shifted his focus to the clay tadpole. The monster was chattering its teeth menacingly, in its signature move, with its back turned to him. A perfect opportunity for a sneak attack, he thought. He began closing in on the monster, trying to remain silent, forcing himself to control even his labored breathing. But in his ears, every breath, every rustle of leaves, under his feet sounded enhanced, as if the clay tadpole must hear it. But it did not. Just as he was close enough and began raising his spear to strike, he stepped on a particularly noisy twig. This was definitely loud enough, but the clay tadpole remained focused on the cat thing. Is it deaf? Saving that thought for later, Powell raised his spear and struck the creature at the top of its front side, where its brain might be. Again, after the initial toughness of the outer clay layer, he felt something softer underneath. The victim got pressed to the ground, wriggled for a short while and finally stilled. Powell pulled out his weapon and waited, anticipating for a few seconds. Just like before, the monster dissolved into purple mist that disappeared into the air, not flowing directly into him. Yet he felt a noticeable change in himself, a warmth spreading slowly from his solar plexus through his entire core, finally reaching his limbs and dissipating promptly. He attempted to grasp his mana sight, as he'd started calling it to himself, but he couldn't calm his mind enough to enter the meditative state necessary. And it wasn't a good time to stand still, deep in his thoughts, so Powell gave up on the attempts for now, and returned to his dash through the forest, only glancing at the cat creature, still perched on the tree, following him with angry eyes. "Don't jump on me now. I just saved you, buddy." He pressed on, creating more distance between himself and the anomaly. Despite his best efforts to be hasty, he heard more and more sounds of agitated animals all around him, not just behind. Angry growls, yelps of pain, snarling, and the very distinct chattering of the new predator in the zone. "There's no way they could outrun me like that," he thought. "They must be spawning away from the anomaly as well." He was snapped out of his musings by a loud trampling noise coming from bushes on his right side. Not even giving him time to plan or react, a pack of boars burst out from the vegetation and hastily paraded right in front of Powell, perhaps 6 or 7 meters away, giving him a good look up close. He was still standing there, paralyzed by shock and indecision, when right after the wild pigs, another group wobbled out of the undergrowth, chattering their teeth and making a lot of noise. Just like the panicked boars, the clay tadpoles completely ignored his unmoving statue and just ran past him, not even acknowledging his presence. Just as Powell was about to start moving and shifted his posture, one last straggler showed up. This one wasn't announcing itself with menacing teeth chattering, and it surprised Powell. His movement momentarily caught the monster's attention, and it tried rotating mid-step, causing its clumsy body to trip and roll. Powell's shock from the encounter was already past, and he jumped on the opportunity. In a few large steps, he closed the distance, lowered the tip of the spear, and pushed it into the creature's head with his entire weight behind the strike. The makeshift weapon easily penetrated the clay-like body and went into the hard ground underneath, bending under Powell's weight and then shattering with a cracking sound. Suddenly facing no resistance, his hands, still holding the broken part of the stick, pushed into sharp splinters, penetrating deep. "Fuck!" he yelled out, letting go of what was left of his weapon and looking at his bleeding left hand. Then, with growing panic, He glanced at the skewered clay tadpole and immediately reached to his backpack for his hatchet. But his enemy was already dissolving into purple mist. And this time, for some reason, it absorbed into Powell's body, like the one after killing the spider head, giving him a more distinct feeling of warmth. Seeing that the immediate threat of the monster was alleviated, he pulled out bandages, wrapped up his bleeding hand, and resumed his escape through the forest that was now turned into a battleground. Chapter 12. Mana Site. Gaia World. 4 days after the shattering. After long minutes of fast walking interspersed with bursts of running, Powell was winded and exhausted. His legs were burning with exertion, and even the insignificant wound on his hand had become more aggravated by the rapid movement. Despite his efforts, he wasn't out of danger yet. He could hear animals fighting or running away in the distance all around him, but actual encounters were more sparse now. He didn't get any more opportunities for easy kills, but luckily, every time he met a group of tadpoles, they were chasing after something else. After several times of having clay tadpoles just run right next to an unmoving Powell, completely ignoring him, he was pretty sure that they had no hearing or smell and only react to movement. Having fought a couple and witnessed how they act, Powell decided that the clay monsters weren't so bad, unless in big numbers. Sadly, they were not the only danger around. One time he came across several tadpole monsters, fighting against some kind of aggressive predator animal, or perhaps it was also a monster. Either way, it was furry thing shaped like a wolf, reaching up to, or even above Powell's waist when on its fours. It was covered with brown fur of different shades and some black spots here and there. The animal was furious, absolutely refusing to give the clay tadpoles any ground despite facing 7 of them. It had lightning-fast reflexes, and whenever one of the monsters jumped, it just smacked it away. Powell did not stay to witness that fight's conclusion. With only his tiny hatchet in his hand, even clay tadpoles might be troublesome, and that predator was a death sentence if it fancied attacking him. That was around 10 minutes earlier. Now Powell had put significant distance between himself and the wolfcat predator, and he was too tired to run anymore. He half rolled, half walked into a shallow basin in the ground, surrounded by a group of trees and thick bushes giving him some cover. For a few minutes, the exhausted man only breathed and relished in the bliss of not moving anymore. After he had already steadied his breathing, his brain started analyzing the situation. The only sustained injury was practically self-inflicted, from breaking his spear, so he now needed a new weapon, and also to somehow deal with his cut hand. Trying to make a new spear while surrounded by enemies probably wasn't the best idea, even if they were deaf, but perhaps he could do something about the injury. Powell reminisced about the purple mist after the clay tadpole despawning. "I should have gotten some power from that," he whispered to himself. The setting wasn't perfect for meditation, with all the action going on in the distance, but the earthy smells and gentle rustle of leaves above somehow eased the relaxation phase, the forest's familiar sense grounding him amid the chaos. He closed his eyes, slowed his breathing, and cleared his mind. It didn't take long for traditional breathing techniques to transform into focusing on new senses. Powell directed his mana sight inward, and immediately noticed some gains. All over his body, he sensed something that gave impressions of a green-colored, sparse haze, pulsing gently within him, warm and vital, like the essence of growth itself. Nature affinity mana, he decided. Carefully, he tried to guide it toward the cut on his hand, attempting to do the same thing he had done earlier when fighting off the fever and possible poisoning. The mana flowed toward the wound, gathered around it, lingered there, and produced a faint sensation of warmth. It did something, a little bit of healing similar to what he was used to from before, but then it simply stopped, idling without further effect. Powell kept trying for several minutes, pushing and guiding the mana, but nothing changed. Then realization struck him. Before, he had been focusing on fighting a disease or poison. What he wanted now was different. The ability he had used before simply was not applicable to closing a cut and repairing damaged tissue. With that in mind, he tried again, this time giving the mana a new intention. The sensation was deeply frustrating. It felt as if he were trying to grab and move something ethereal using sheer mental effort, something that kept slipping through his grasp. But after repeated attempts, something finally clicked. A large portion of the mana inside Powell suddenly began to dissipate, seeping somewhere deeper into his soul. Instinctively, he understood that this was necessary. When the process ended, he found that he could now direct the remaining mana much more precisely. It began to seep slowly into his wound, gently working its way through the damaged flesh, and, hopefully, starting to mend it. Once healing had begun, Powell realized that he did not need to struggle with it so much anymore. From this, he learned something important. Even though all the energy inside him had been the same color, perhaps belonging to the same affinity of magic, there were actually two different kinds of it. One kind had been consumed or absorbed to grant him the ability to do something new with the other. Now that he did not need to wrestle so much with the internal mana flow, he directed a portion of his attention outwards with his mana sense. The most dominant presence was, unsurprisingly, green mana. It looked almost identical to the mana inside him, and felt the same, which led him to call it nature affinity mana. It gathered around living things, sometimes flowing gently between them in greenish, river-like currents. It resonated with what was inside him, yet he knew instinctively that it was not his. It was untamed. Because he was resting in a terrain depression, Powell also sensed something beneath him. Underground, there was a brownish type of mana, rigid, unmoving, and distinctly foreign to him. Above him, high in the sky, he sensed a light blue, ethereal mana. It swirled and danced rapidly, completely indifferent to his presence. Powell knew without doubt that he had no connection to it at all. Then he noticed something else. An orange, wire-like presence, with an almost corporeal feel, slithered its way into the basin where he was hiding. It was very thin, with its length reaching much past Powell's senses, in the direction of the anomaly. It moved its tip with intent, seemingly trying to reach Powell and trying to connect. He somehow knew its intentions. The sight of it filled Powell with revulsion. He nearly broke his meditative state as panic surged through him. Desperately, he reached for his own mana, trying to do something before the orange wire reached him. But he never got the chance. His instinctive reaction, his fear, rejection, and emotional recoil, seemed to smack the thing away. The orange presence recoiled, and quickly lost interest in him, wiggling away, and increasing distance quickly. Powell observed his surroundings in concern, that the wire thing might return, but it faded out of his mana sight range and never returned. Meanwhile, most of his remaining mana had been used up, so he left meditation, exhaling sharply. Right? Enough doodling around, Powell said to himself as he broke out of meditation. Time to go, before it gets completely dark. Before leaving his hiding spot, he pulled out his flashlight and checked his wound. It was no longer bleeding, but the cut was still there. It was hard to tell whether it had healed at all under the blood scab. Well, if it is healing, it is not going to do much for serious wounds. He mumbled in disappointment, rebandaged the wound and moved on, disappearing into the fading light. Chapter 13. A New Toy. Gaia World. 4 days after the shattering. Powell's brief rest in the basin had done little to restore his strength. His legs still ached from the earlier exertion, and without a proper spear, he felt exposed. His hatchet offered no reach for fending off those relentless clay tadpoles. He needed a new weapon, something sturdy, and ideally a sheltered spot to hole up before full night descended. As he trudged onward, his eyes scanned the underbrush for a suitable branch. He snatched up one straight limb, considering how to cut and sharpen it, but it proved too thin and flexible, more whip than spear. "I need a bigger stick," he muttered with a chuckle, a childhood memory bubbling up. "Yeah, I'm totally not running. I just need a bigger stick." His gaze fell on a fallen branch half buried under foliage and shadows. He wrestled it free, the wood scraping against roots and leaves with a dry rasp. It was larger than expected, still attached to a hefty chunk of trunk that had sheared off with it. Too much work to trim down, he thought, eyeing the gnarled form. But something about its shape drew him in, the natural curves suggesting an ergonomic grip, imperfections that could serve as spikes. He set to work with his hatchet, chopping away small twigs and shortening the handle to shoulder height. What emerged wasn't a spear but a crude hammer axe. An 8-kilogram head with protruding sharp spikes for thrusting and swinging, balanced just right in his hands. Focused on his new prize, Powell barely registered the approaching chattering until it was too late. He spun, hammer in hand, just as a clay tadpole coiled for its leap, teeth clacking menacingly. Fluidly shifting his testing swing into a downward arc, he took 2 quick steps forward and brought the spiked end crashing down. Wham! The point pierced the monster's clay skin, the heavy head flattening it in a spray of brownish innards that splattered across his arms and face. Arg! Powell spat out gritty flecks in disgust, but a wide grin split his features. Hell yes! Big stick! He had no time to celebrate. Another tadpole lunged for his hands. He released the hammer instinctively, stumbling back 2 clumsy steps to avoid the attack. Spotting a third wobbling into jumping range, he lunged for his weapon again. Seizing the handle, he swung wide, catching the airborne monster on the hammer's side and sending it smashing into a nearby trunk with a wet squelch. Without breaking momentum, Powell rotated his swing, dashing forward to meet the last assailant. He smashed it into the ground with the same devastating force, its body crumpling in a satisfying burst. Breath heaving, he scanned the encroaching darkness for more threats. Nothing stirred, at least nothing he could see, besides puffs of purple mist from despawning victims. At this point, the night was so thick he could barely make out details beyond a few meters. Adrenaline still thrumming in his veins, Powell shouldered his backpack and pressed on, or tried to. In the pitch black, he tripped over roots and got smacked by unseen branches, progress grinding to a halt. Finally, he gave up on stealth and pulled out his flashlight, its beam cutting a narrow path through the gloom. Even that proved insufficient against the tangled terrain. Just as exhaustion threatened to drop him where he stood, he stumbled into a small valley reeking of moisture, ringed by a thicket of bushes. Descending into the inky depths with only his flashlight's dim glow, Powell found a cramped clearing amid the trunks. Gathering wood for a fire was impossible. He'd risk poking out an eye in the dark. And also, flames could attract more monsters anyway. Still, he needed to spot attackers before they pounced. Resigned to taking additional risk, he opted for his glow sticks, snapping and shaking a few to life before scattering them in a rough circle around the clearing's edges. Their eerie green light cast long shadows, but illuminated the perimeter enough to warn of intruders. Sinking into the middle, shrouded in relative darkness himself, Powell surrendered to an uneasy vigil, the night's chill seeping into his bones as he braced for whatever lurked beyond the glow. Chapter 14. Good night's sleep. Gaia World. 4 days after the shattering. Sitting in the dark, Powell appreciated having warm autumn clothes, as the night had grown chilly. He opted against setting up his tent. With such a high chance of enemies emerging, he preferred not limiting his visibility at all. After a long day of exertion, sleep was tempting, but it didn't feel smart. Would I be safe? These tadpoles react to movement, so perhaps they'd ignore me in my sleep, even if they came here. Actually, before I sleep, I need to exercise my new powers, he mused. Too tired for traditional cross-legged meditation, Powell lay flat on the ground, covered with his sleeping bag, and began the exercise. Meditation and awareness of internal and external mana came easier with every session. This time, he managed it after just a few minutes of steady breathing. First, after settling into the proper mindset, he directed his attention outwards, a little worried about the orange wire things he'd seen with his mana sight last time. Plus, observing the different flows of energy was mesmerizing and relaxing on its own. There seemed to be more types of mana, or perhaps he was getting better at seeing them. Here they are. Powell noticed 2 separate orange wire things. They reached out of his sight range in the direction of the anomaly. Now that he thought about it, there seemed to be more new types flowing from the anomaly. Perhaps it's producing them? Was that wire thing also just a different mana type? He observed them warily, but none attempted to get anywhere near him. They just slithered in the distance with no apparent purpose. Satisfied that nothing was encroaching, Powell redirected his mana sight inwards and instructed the newly acquired energy to begin mending his hand. It was simultaneously mentally taxing and relaxing, a combination that eventually lulled him into sleep. He startled awake, confused, not knowing where he was, hearing a weird sound. It took Powell a good 5 seconds to realize what the sound was. Momentarily, his heart jumped to his throat in an adrenaline rush. It was a clay tadpole's teeth chattering, and it was close. He jumped to his feet, grabbing the hammer, and assessed the situation. One of those buggers had entered the circle of light created by the glow sticks and was wobbling near one of them, making that creepy noise. The monster was turned toward Powell, with the glow stick between it and him, but when he cautiously closed in, the creature just kept fixating on the light. Is it blinded by the light? Only when he was already mid-swing did the tadpole finally realize there was new danger, but it was too late. He put down the hammer's head on the ground, leaned on its handle, and looked impassively at the monster's body dissolving. I freaked out so much seeing them spawn by that anomaly. But was that really warranted? With slow and telegraphed attacks, these things are practically oversized chihuahuas. They are loud and aggressive, but can't do all that much. His musings were interrupted by annoying chattering. Just as he rotated and lifted the hammer in preparation, a clay tadpole had already jumped. There wasn't enough time for a full swing, so he just pushed the hammer's handle into the airborne monster and knocked it to the ground. But as he did that, a second one had already prepared its attack. A last-second reaction made it impossible to do anything about the second tadpole, lunging into Powell's calf. It lodged itself into his leg with a sharp pain that caused Powell's knee to buckle slightly, making him lose balance. He took 2 steps away and regained his footing just in time for the first monster to signal its attack again. Not knowing how to dislodge the one snacking on his leg, Powell took a desperate swing and let the hammerhead fall on the one readying itself. The hit had no extra force added, only the weight of the weapon, and even that barely struck the thing's head. But it was enough. Arg! Fuck! Powell grumbled, grimacing in pain, and fell over, letting his weapon go. The clay tadpole held his muscle clutched in its jaws and wriggled, causing intense pain. The downed man reached for the enemy's jaws and, with effort, unclenched them, forcing them open. Blood started staining Powell's pants with a steady flow. Not having any weapon, he began fisting the clay skin with wet, hollow sounds, but with no effect, besides not letting the opponent any time to prepare an attack. The clumsy thing only wriggled, trying to get away. After 10 seconds of beating on the tadpole, with the only result being hurting his own fists now, Powell crawled quickly for his hammer. Using it as a crutch, he stood up. Uneasily standing on both legs, he descended the hammer, squashing the monster. Powell did not even wait for the energy to finish flowing into him and hobbled to his backpack, still clutching the hammer. Fucking overgrown chihuahuas. The remaining bandages were barely enough to wrap his calf a few times, with blood still visibly seeping through. "Oh, this can't be good," he mumbled. "Let's hope I can magic this problem away." He jested, but with clear worry in his voice. Powell lay down again with the hammer in reach and looked around for any threats. "If I don't bleed out tonight, I'm gonna hunt them down for more power." With that decision, he closed his eyes in an attempt to heal himself. Chapter 15. A Snack. Gaia World. 5 days after the shattering. It took Powell around 10 minutes to stop his thoughts from racing in his head. At first he attempted to listen to the whispers of the night, inhaling deeply the various scents of damp foliage. Even before entering a proper state of mind, his senses seemed to have expanded and now incorporated mana sense. Mana perception wove itself naturally into his awareness, no longer something he had to strain for. Green mana radiated from every living thing around him, trees, bushes, grass, even the unseen roots beneath the soil. It pulsed slowly and steadily, like the heartbeat of the land itself, subtle but ever-present. Below him, beneath layers of soil and stone, earth-aligned mana lay thick and unmoving. It felt heavy and stubborn, packed tight like compressed clay. It didn't flow so much as exist, giving off a feeling of stability and resistance, a foundation rather than a current. Above, the air told a different story. Air mana danced constantly, thin threads and pale azure wisps shifting with every breeze. It never stayed in one place for long, flickering and scattering like nervous ghosts. Compared to earth mana's solidity, it felt almost fragile, fast, evasive, and impossible to grasp even for a moment. And then there were the others. Far in the distance, where the anomaly lay, orange-tinted mana extended outward in thin, wire-like filaments, probing the surrounding space in slow, searching motions. They didn't feel natural. They didn't belong. Their presence made his stomach turn, like watching something deeply disgusting. After several minutes of simply existing in that expanded awareness, Powell felt calm enough to turn inward. To accomplish that, he used a meditative technique of passively observing sensations inside one's body. In this case, taking inventory of his injuries, noting each pulse of pain. The bitten leg was the most intense and sharp, dominating his attention. The cut hand still throbbed with each heartbeat. Bruised knuckles and countless minor scrapes itched or burned, all accumulated over a day of survival. While remaining in meditation, Powell shifted his focus to his internal mana sense. Having killed several monsters, there was now more energy to work with than before, but he had a very clear feeling that this wasn't much by any means. If there was a point of saturation for that energy, he was nowhere near it. Examining the power more closely confirmed his previous suspicions. There was more than one type of energy here. The one for changing abilities seemed to have been acquired from the last tadpoles, which had despawned into mist flowing into Powell. He attempted something new, trying to push this mana into improving his muscles to be stronger or faster, but the feeling was as if the energy slipped through his mental fingers, refusing to be shaped into anything new. Knowing that he might be on a timeline involving bleeding and potential disease, Powell did not linger on this fruitless effort for long, and instead pushed this energy to improve regeneration. Instantly, it responded, disappearing somewhere, hopefully doing exactly what Powell intended. After overcoming that hurdle, what remained was the most important task: repairing his injuries. He kept continuously seeping energy into regenerating tissues, eventually sliding from meditation into sleep without even realizing it. Morning came cold. The chill seeped into his skin, but waking up felt unexpectedly pleasant. Birds chirped nearby, their calls overlapping in short, energetic bursts. Leaves rustled gently as a mild breeze passed through the canopy, carrying fresh, clean air that filled his lungs and lifted his mood instantly. Powell stretched instinctively and winced. His muscles protested immediately, stiff and sore from yesterday's exertions. His back popped softly as he twisted, thighs aching with that deep, familiar soreness that came after pushing too hard. He sat up and checked his injuries. The wounds were gone. The cut on his hand had sealed completely, leaving smooth skin behind. The bite marks on his leg remained only as faint discoloration and tenderness beneath the surface. No swelling, no open flesh. Whatever his regeneration ability was capable of, it clearly didn't care about muscle soreness. Pain lingered where effort had been excessive. Damage, though, that it erased cleanly. He exhaled slowly, his thoughts aligning themselves. "Those monsters are easy to kill," he muttered. "And everything they've done so far heals overnight if I have power." Another realization followed quickly. I also have to kill them to get that power. Healing and progression both depend on it. He rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. This isn't even a question. I have to hunt them. Power level, I guess. Maybe regeneration won't be the only thing I get. Then another problem surfaced. So, how do I actually do that? Normal survival took time, boiling water, worrying about infections, preserving food. But how much of that still mattered? If I can heal infections and diseases with magic, water purification becomes optional. Meat safety too, as long as it tastes acceptable. He paused. Oh, water. Standing, he slung his pack over his shoulder and started scouting the immediate area. The spot he'd later decide to be his base of operations was a natural haven. Towering trees clustered so densely that their branches formed a roof, blocking sunlight and leaving the ground mostly bare. Tannins from their leaves might have leached into the soil too, stunting undergrowth. Whatever the reason, it created a spacious zone, roughly 100 by 200 meters, like a forest hall with high trunks as pillars. Patches of grass and shade-loving plants dotted the earth, ferns unfurling here and there, vines creeping low, but mostly it was open, easy to navigate. At the far end, a stream gurgled invitingly, its water clear over smooth stones, flowing into a murky pond surrounded by reeds and all kinds of vegetation typical of swampy terrain, lush and vigorous in the only sunny terrain around. Powell filled both bottles with water and fully sated his thirst with raw liquid from the flowing stream. He scanned the nearby marsh for birds to hunt, as hunger was clutching his stomach by this point, and noticed some movement nearby. He carefully put down his backpack and, with hammer in both hands, began sneaking closer to see the situation. What unfolded before his eyes was a dance of life and death between a pigeon-sized bird, with ruffled brown and green feathers, and some sort of large lizard. It had a wide, flattened body around 1.5 meters long. On its 4 legs situated on its sides, it reached perhaps 50 centimeters in height. Its head was wide with a short, flat snout. The predator's skin was shiny with moisture, displaying a mix of colors dominated by shades of blue. The amphibian was moving in short, rapid bursts, attempting to close its maw on the poor bird, which jumped away narrowly each time, flapping its wings, but not able to fly away for some reason. Every failure was followed by the lizard groaning loudly, vibrating its throat in outrage, then stopping all movement as if reconsidering, before another attempt. Powell did not hesitate. He circled around the scene, making sure to approach the large lizard from behind, and bashed it in the head with full force. The spike did not strike true. It hit at an odd angle, and the weapon's weight caused it to twist uncomfortably in Powell's hands, sliding off the lizard's head. The creature contracted and jerked to the side, almost escaping the weapon's reach, but instead of running, it twisted awkwardly on its belly and tried to right itself. Powell adjusted his grip and hit it again, this time missing the head by a narrow margin but smashing into the neck. He repeated wide swings several times until the head was smashed, with tissue splashing after the last blow. The lizard still twitched, but it was clearly just post-mortem nerve reactions. There wasn't the anticipated dissolution into purple mist. So it wasn't a monster, Powell said. Even better. Food. Truthfully, Powell had been thinking of the bird as his dinner, and for some reason had expected the lizard to disappear after death. Now he looked at the sprawled, fluffy bird contemplatively. Without a fridge, it's probably best to keep you alive. For a snack later, the bird crowed in disagreement.